Hi, I'm Scott Olsen. My now 32-year-old son, Stephen, is blind and brain damaged due to medical negligence when he was 2 years old.
Hi, good evening. I'm Tammy Smick. My son Alex died at 20 years old because of medical negligence. He was overdosed in a hospital.
When we went to court, we found out that a 1975 law, the Medical Injury Compensation Reform Act, also known as MICRA, caps the amount a jury can award innocent patients injured by medical malpractice for their lost quality of life, disability, or death at $250,000.
The maximum I could receive for my son's death was $250,000.
And the maximum Stephen could receive for his lifetime of blindness and disability was $250,000. The $250,000 cap set by the legislature in 1975 is worth $50,000 in today's dollars. It's never been adjusted for inflation.
That is, until now.
With a legislative compromise signed into law, this year, injured patients will finally have access to attorneys in justice.
A little later, we will celebrate Nick, Courtney, and Charles for leading the initiative campaign for the Fairness for Injured Patients Act. The ballot measure that leveraged the historic legislative compromise. But now we want to take a moment to recognize many of the heroes who have fought beside us.
In the 1970s, increasing medical malpractice premiums led doctors to protest at Governor Jerry Brown's office in Sacramento. The doctors' wives, dressed in fur coats, sat in at Jerry Brown's office. They blamed increased claims from victims' lawsuits.
However, high premiums were not about increased claims. Insurance companies raised their rates to make up for their losses on Wall Street. But insurance companies blamed the victims. Travelers Insurance threatened to double its rates for 8,000 doctors in Southern California. Bill Chernoff sued Travelers Insurance for overcharging doctors for malpractice insurance, debunking the industry's claims. He won that case in 1981 and forced the insurance company to return nearly $50 million to doctors.
But it was too late. MICRA was already the law. Wiley Aiken, who became president of the California Trial Lawyers in 1976, remembers Jerry Brown telling him why he would sign the MICRA law in 1975.
I indicated to him I felt with a good deal of confidence at that time that it was unconstitutional, taking one segment of victims and treating them differently than another segment of victims. And he looked at me straight-faced and said, "I agree with you, Wiley. I think it's unconstitutional. But why should I take all the hit and pressure? Because we know what's going to happen. It'll go to the Supreme Court. The Roseburg Court will declare it unconstitutional, and it will never be implemented. Therefore, why should I inject myself into this controversy and take whatever the political consequences would be?" And obviously a disappointing answer. Of course, at the time he's having this discussion, and we're talking about the Roseburg Court, none of us could predict that in just a few years there would be no Roseburg Court. Roseburg would be recalled along with two other justices, all who would have voted to strike the bill down as unconstitutional. And a new governor, a conservative governor, then swept in three conservative new Supreme Court justices in California who, in a close vote of 4-3, ultimately upheld the constitutionality of the medical malpractice bill.
Russell Kussman and Dave Harney collected 1 million signatures for a ballot measure to lift the MICRA cap. The initiative fell just short of qualifying for the ballot.
In 1987, doctors, insurance companies, and trial lawyers, led by Brown Green, sat down at Frank Fat's restaurant in Sacramento to work out a deal. They signed a truce known as the napkin deal that didn't shift the needle on the cap, but said no side would go to the ballot box to change the law.
That peace was broken in 1988 when Consumer Watchdog founder Harvey Rosenfield put Insurance Reform Prop 103 on the ballot to regulate insurance rates. Prop 103 prevailed despite the $80 million spent against it by the insurance companies. Rate regulation has held insurance rates, including medical malpractice rates, down ever since.
By 1994, there was talk of including a California-type MICRA cap nationally in the Clinton healthcare plan. Ralph Nader asked Harvey to create a project to stop it. Harvey formed Consumers for Quality Care with Jamie Court to stop a national MICRA cap. Jamie recruited my wife Kathy and me to speak out.
Well, he is blind. He has brain damage. He's got cerebral palsy. He's traumatic brain injury from that. He has a brain shunt in his head right now for drainage. He's had to learn to walk, eat, talk. He spent 5 months in the hospital when basically my philosophy is an $850 scan would have saved everything that he's lost right now. And I asked 2 doctors, 1 nurse practitioner who...
This was a no-brainer in the sense that a scan should have been sure.
Yes.
It should have been obvious.
We created the Casualty of the Day campaign to dramatize the problem.
With the Olsens traveling the country, the federal attempts to create a national cap failed in 1995 and in 2005.
Meanwhile, in Sacramento, led by Nancy Drabble, Leanne Tratton, and Nancy Peverini, the California Trial Lawyers Association, later known as the Consumer Attorneys of California, lobbied to increase the cap, working with survivors through Consumers for Quality Care. But the bills were blocked by the medical insurance complex.
All the while, new, tragic cases demonstrated how unjust the cap was. Consumer Attorneys of California, led by Bruce Brusovich, organized attacks on MICRA in the courts, hoping to have it overturned as unconstitutional. However, every time a case got close, the defendant settled.
Other cases proved how dangerous medicine had become with MICRA, preventing accountability for doctors and hospitals. And fueled by the opioid crisis, cases became even more dramatic. Bob Pack lost his 2 young children when Kaiser freely gave an addict drugs, and while under the influence, she swerved off the road and killed them.
With new attention on the crisis for patients because of the opioid epidemic, the survivors and consumer attorneys of California turned to the ballot box in 2014 to change MICRA and opioid addiction with Prop 46, a ballot measure authored by Bob Pack. Attempts at a negotiated peace led by Wiley Aiken and Mark Robinson didn't take hold. And although Prop 46 failed, the campaign raised the profile of the injustice done to medical negligence survivors. And the idea of raising the cap was endorsed by every editorial board in the state, and a movement was revived.
But the legislature still refused to increase the MICRA cap.
Until
we have to change MICRA. Okay? It's gotta go. It's gotta go. And the way we're gonna do it is we're gonna get it back on the ballot as a proposition.
Lots of people worked hard to get the Fairness for Injured Patients Act initiative written right, qualified for the ballot, and have a strong title and summary.
Consumer Watchdog organized to find a survivor in every Senate district who had a MICRA tragedy and to explain the need for the initiative. Nick Rowley vowed to keep going to the ballot again and again and again until MICRA was changed. Ultimately, the medical insurance complex, with a nudge from former insurance commissioner Steve Poizner, decided to settle rather than fight the fight.
And the rest is history.
And you created the conditions, all of you created the conditions, where success in terms of advancing this cause became almost irresistible. There was a sense of exhaustion, a sense of expectation that this was the moment, in this case. There was a proverbial pattern interrupt, and that was the pattern interrupt. And, you know, inspiration, desperation. A lot of people inspired, a lot of people desperate to figure things out, and we came together under pressure. Perhaps that's sometimes what it takes, but not under duress. And I think the only duress was exhaustion, but the duress in this context was a recognition that there are people under duress that deserve more and deserve better.
We would like to take this time to acknowledge the heroes, sung and unsung, whose rage for justice has made this change possible and are here tonight. Will the following people please stand? And please, everyone, hold your applause until everyone has stand. Wiley Aiken, Mike Alder, Greg Bentley, Bruce Boyette, Jim Brolte,
Bruce Brusevich, Rochelle Cano, the staff of Consumer Watchdog, Xavier De Leon and Chris Dolan,
Tracy Dominguez, Gary and Nava Dordick, Bruce and Trudy Fagel, Mauro Fiore, Monique Himes, Arash Hamanpour,
Denise Johnson, Charles Johnson, Sean and Chevron Lazinski, Greer Levin, Jamie Margavia, and Dan Molino.
Evelyn Martinez, Mike Maddock, Michelle Milovina, Bree Nelson and Mia Moreno, Jacob Norman, Steve Poizner,
Annette Rolando, and of course, Patch Ramirez, Mark Robinson, Nick and Courtney Rowley, Ibanari Sek, Ken Sigelman, Tim Smick,
Dr. Paul Song, Kim Turbin, Steve Vardazarian, Jeff Wells, Morgan White, and Stuart Zanville.
And Laurie Lalonde.
Let's give them all a big round of applause.